The
I saw
shot
your
split the
notice.
morning air
I'm
with the
looking for
finality
work.
of
I can
Judgment Day.
cook.
You cook?
Mason Reed stood
This ain't no
motionless as
place
the
for a
echo rolled
woman and her
across the valley,
youngins.
watching the
We
two
need this.
rustlers crumple to the dust. His Colt 45 still smoking, he leveled his gaze at the third man, the only one still breathing. "Tell Blackwell his cattle days are over in Silver Creek," Mason said, voice as dry as the Arizona hardpan beneath his boots. "Next time, I won't leave a messenger." The survivor scrambled onto his horse, terror etched across his face. As the thunder of hoofbeats faded into the distance, Mason holstered his weapon with practiced precision. 7 notches marked its handle, a ledger of lives taken, each one weighing on his soul like stones in a drowning man's pockets. The year was 1875, and Mason Reed's reputation still echoed from the war. The best sharpshooter in the 5th Cavalry, they'd called him. Now he was just a rancher trying to keep what was his in the Arizona territory. 2 years a widower after Elizabeth succumbed to the fever that swept through these parts in '73. The ranch house stood weathered but defiant against the merciless sun, much like the man who owned it. Inside, silence had become Mason's only companion. The pantry was nearly bare, the cooking pots unused. A man could shoot straight and drive cattle, but without someone to keep the hearth, a ranch was just land with a house on it, not a home. The Silver Creek Saloon buzzed with the usual Friday commotion when Mason pushed through the batwing doors. He moved with the deliberate economy of a predator, each step measured and aware. Men nodded respectfully, some shifting aside to clear his path to the bar. "Usual?" the bartender asked. "Just water today, Jim. Got business." Mason withdrew a folded paper from his coat pocket, pressing it flat against the bar's scarred surface. In block letters it read, "Hiring ranch cook, meals for one. Lodging provided, must know cooking, shooting, and how to avoid trouble. Post it by the door," Mason instructed, sliding across 2 bits. Mayor Harris approached, his considerable girth preceding him. "Still refusing to consider a proper wife, Reed? Town's got 3 eligible widows who jump at the chance." Mason's gaze hardened. "Need a cook, Tom, not a wife." "Same difference in these parts," Harris chuckled. "Man your age ought to." "Man my age knows what he needs." Mason cut him off, turning away. The conversation died as the saloon doors swung open. Sheriff Patterson entered, face grim beneath his gray mustache. He spotted Mason and made a beeline. "Reed, heard about the rustlers this morning." Mason nodded once. "Just protecting what's mine, Sheriff." "It's Blackwell's men, sure as sunrise," Patterson said, lowering his voice. "He's back in the territory. Word is he's running with 9 men now." Mason's jaw tightened. Jack Blackwell should have stayed east of the Mississippi. War's been over 10 years, Mason. Not for some. Mason checked the Colt at his hip, an unconscious habit from darker days. "I'll handle my affairs." "Like you handled those men today. 2 dead, 1 running scared. They were stealing my cattle." Patterson sighed. "Just be careful. Blackwell hasn't forgotten Chancellorsville." Neither had Mason. The memory of that blood-soaked field where he'd saved Jack Blackwell's life, only for the man to later betray their unit, still burned like a hot iron against his mind. The sun hung low when Mason returned to the ranch. He was securing the horses when he noticed dust on the horizon. A single rider approaching, hand resting on his colt, he watched the figure materialize into a woman on horseback. 3 children clustered around her. She reined in 20 paces from the house, straight-backed and clear-eyed. She appraised both him and the property with a single sweeping glance. Her dress was trail-worn but mended with careful stitches. At her hip, a revolver rested in a weathered holster. "Mr. Reed?" Her voice carried across the yard, strong and steady. "That's right. Sarah Mitchell. I've come about the cook position." She nodded toward the notice folded in her hand. Mason's gaze shifted to the children. The oldest, a boy of perhaps 11, stood protectively beside his mother, eyes narrowed with suspicion. A younger boy, 7 or so, stared openly at Mason's gun belt. The smallest, barely out of toddling age, clung to his mother's skirts. Advertisement didn't mention children, Mason said flatly. Advertisement didn't mention much of anything, she countered. Just that you need someone who can cook and shoot and knows how to avoid trouble. She patted the revolver at her side. I can do all three. My boys know how to work and stay out of the way. Mason studied her a moment longer. Where's their father? Something flickered in her eyes. Caution, perhaps. Dead. Army raid on a trading post near Tucson. Mason recognized the careful construction of her words. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling everything either. He'd seen that look before. In soldiers holding back parts of a report. I've got 1 week available, he said finally. You can prove yourself or move on. She nodded once, dismounting with fluid grace. James, she addressed the oldest boy, help your brothers down. As they moved toward the house, Mason noticed the way Sarah Mitchell scanned the surroundings, checking sight lines, noting cover, assessing threats. Not the habits of a simple cook. The woman was running from something, or someone. Mason Reed had spent too many years reading men's intentions through a rifle scope to miss the signs. But then again, everyone in the West was running from something, himself included. By the third day, Mason had to admit Sarah Mitchell could cook. The kitchen, dormant since Elizabeth's passing, now filled each morning with the scent of fresh biscuits and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. She managed the household with military efficiency, stretching supplies that Mason had neglected and bringing order to rooms long surrendered to dust. The youngest boy, Michael, had taken to following Mason at a distance, observing his every move with solemn curiosity. Daniel, the middle child, spent hours near the corral, fascinated by the horses, but it was James, the eldest, who concerned Mason most. The boy watched him like a hawk, hand often straying to the small knife at his belt whenever Mason approached his mother. That afternoon, Mason found Sarah at the water pump, cursing softly as she worked the handle. Leather gasket shot, he said, approaching. Been meaning to fix it. I can manage, she replied, not looking up. Mason moved beside her, taking the wrench from her hand. Their fingers brushed briefly, a contact that seemed to startle them both. Where'd you learn to cook like that? He asked, disassembling the pump head. My father ran a way station in Kansas. 15 hungry men a day, sometimes more. And the shooting? She stiffened slightly. Same place. Indians raided twice a year like clockwork. Pa taught me young. Mason nodded, working in silence for several minutes before speaking again. The boy, James, he doesn't trust me. James doesn't trust any man with a gun. She handed him a replacement gasket. Not anymore. That night after the children were asleep, Mason caught Sarah slipping a Remington Derringer under her pillow. He also noticed the small leather pouch she kept hidden in her skirts. Too heavy for sewing materials, too valuable to leave unattended. Gold, most likely. The universal currency of those with no time for goodbyes. A week stretched into 2. Mason found himself listening for the sound of Sarah's voice in the morning, watching the way she moved through the house, as if claiming it inch by inch. The boys began to settle in, Michael leaving small treasures of rocks and feathers on Mason's porch chair, Daniel helping with the horses, learning their names and habits. Only James remained aloof, though Mason had caught him practicing with his knife behind the barn, throwing it at a makeshift target with fierce concentration. Your stance is wrong, Mason said, stepping from the shadows. The boy startled, retrieving his knife with wary eyes. Here. Mason positioned himself, demonstrating. Weight on your back foot, elbow up, follow through with your wrist. James hesitated before mimicking the stance, his throw landing with a satisfying thunk in the center of the target. "My pa taught me to throw," James said, the first words he'd voluntarily spoken to Mason. "Before he died." Mason nodded. "He taught you well. Ma says you were in the war." "That's right. Did you kill people?" Mason looked at the boy, seeing not childish curiosity, but the calculation of someone measuring a potential threat. "Yes," he answered honestly. "Only those who needed killing." "How do you know who needs killing?" "That's the hardest part," Mason replied. "Sometimes you don't know until it's too late." James retrieved his knife, considering Mason's words. "The men who came this morning, were they looking for us?" Mason's blood turned cold. "What men?" "3 riders. They watched the house from the ridge while you were checking the north pasture. Ma didn't see them. I did." Mason placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, the first time he'd touched any of the children. "James, I need you to tell me exactly what you saw." That evening, Mason cleaned his Winchester repeater at the kitchen table, methodically working the oiled cloth along the barrel. Sarah entered, stopping short at the sight of the rifle. "Going hunting?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "In a manner of speaking." Mason loaded the weapon with practiced precision. "James saw riders watching the house today." Her face remained composed, but her knuckles whitened around the doorframe. "What kind of riders?" "The kind that don't announce themselves." Mason set the rifle aside. "Time for truth, Mrs. Mitchell. Who's after you?" Sarah sank into a chair, the weight of her secrets visibly pressing down on her shoulders. "Not me. James." Mason waited, letting the silence draw her out. "My husband, Robert Mitchell. He wasn't just killed in a raid." Her voice hardened. "He rode with Jack Blackwell's gang. Got himself shot during a bank robbery in Tucson." The name hit Mason like a physical blow. "Blackwell." Sarah nodded. "Before Robert died, he told James where they'd hidden the take from 3 bank jobs, over $20,000. She pulled out the leather pouch, opening it to reveal gold coins. "This is all I took, enough to start somewhere new. But Blackwell thinks we have the rest." "And James knows where it is?" "Robert made him memorize landmarks, said it was our insurance." Her eyes met Mason's, unflinching. "I never wanted that blood money, but Blackwell won't believe that." Mason rose, pacing the length of the kitchen. "Jack Blackwell and I have history, bad blood from the war." "What kind of history?" "The killing kind." Mason turned to face her. "He was my lieutenant in the 5th Cavalry. I saved his life at Chancellorsville. Later found out he was selling information to Confederate scouts. Got 6 of our men killed in an ambush. What happened? Military justice was too slow for some. There was a hanging party." Mason's face darkened. "I stopped it, convinced them to let the Army handle it. Blackwell escaped before they could court-martial him." Sarah studied him. "So he hates you twice over. Once for knowing his treachery, once for saving him from a hanging he deserved." "Seems that way." "We should leave," Sarah said, rising. "Tonight, this isn't your fight." Mason's hand closed over hers, surprising them both. "There are some fights a man can't walk away from, Mrs. Mitchell." The next morning, Mason rode into town at first light. He found Sheriff Patterson outside the jailhouse, coffee cups steaming in the dawn chill. "I need deputies," Mason stated without preamble. Patterson's bushy eyebrows rose. "What for?" "Blackwell's coming, not just for me, for the woman and children at my ranch." The sheriff set down his cup. "That's the cook you hired? What's her connection?" Mason explained briefly, watching Patterson's expression grow grimmer with each word. "Jesus, Reed, you've got a powder keg out there." "That's why I need men." Patterson shook his head slowly. "Town council won't approve deputies for a private matter. Not after what happened in '71. Mason remembered. a range war that had left 6 men dead and the town divided. Then I'll handle it myself. Like hell you will, Patterson snapped. That's suicide, and you know it. What would you suggest, Sheriff? Hand over a woman and 3 children to Blackwell? Patterson sighed heavily. Give me 2 days. I'll send wires, call in some favors. Meanwhile, bring them to town. They can stay at the hotel. Blackwell has eyes in town. We both know that. Then what's your plan? Mason checked his ammunition belt. Fight smart. Fight on my ground. As Mason turned to leave, Patterson called after him. Reed, when this is over, there won't be any middle ground. Either Blackwell dies or you do. There never was middle ground, Mason replied. Not since Chancellorsville. By sunset, Mason had transformed the ranch into a fortress. Strategic firing positions, escape routes, supply caches, the instincts of war returning with disturbing ease. Sarah worked alongside him, demonstrating proficiency with firearms that confirmed Mason's suspicions about her background. As they fortified the barn, he finally asked the question that had been nagging at him. Your father's way station, where exactly in Kansas? Sarah's hand stilled on the Winchester she was loading. There was no way station. I figured as much. My father was a bounty hunter, taught me to shoot before I could properly write my name. She chambered around with a decisive click. I met Robert in Wichita. He was charming, said all the right things. Never mentioned he rode with outlaws until after we were married, and I was carrying James. Mason washed her hands, steady, competent, as she checked the firing mechanism. You've killed before, he stated rather than asked. 3 men. Her voice was matter-of-fact. All deserved it. One was coming for Michael with a knife during the Tucson robbery. Robert's own partner. That night they sat on the porch. The vast Arizona sky sprawled above them like a blanket of diamonds on black velvet. The children slept inside, exhausted from helping prepare defenses all day. What will you do? After, Mason asked. Sarah considered the question. Find somewhere quiet. Raise my boys to be better men than their father. You could stay, Mason said, surprising himself with the offer. She turned to study his face in the moonlight. Why would you want that? We've brought nothing but trouble to your door. Maybe I've had enough quiet, Mason replied. Too much quiet makes a man forget he's alive. Before she could respond, James appeared in the doorway, face pale. Riders coming, he whispered. At least 8. Mason was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Get your brothers to the root cellar, he instructed. Sarah, take position in the house. Remember the signals. As Sarah hurried inside, Mason gripped James's shoulder. You're the last defense, boy. If anything happens to your mother and me, you take that back trail we marked. Get your brothers to Sheriff Patterson. James nodded, fear and determination warring in his young face. Yes, sir. Mason watched him disappear into the house, realizing it was the first time the boy had addressed him with respect. The approaching riders were still distant shadows against the moonlit landscape. Mason took position behind the corral fence, steadying his breathing as he had hundreds of times before, lining up shots across battlefields and mountain valleys. His finger rested lightly on the trigger of his Winchester. In the quiet before violence erupted, a strange peace settled over him. Whatever came with the dawn, Mason Reed would meet it standing. The attack began at first light, 8 riders splitting into 2 groups to approach from different angles. Mason picked off 2 before they reached the outer perimeter, his shots precise and unhurried. From the house, Sarah's rifle cracked 3 times in rapid succession. One rider fell, another clutched his shoulder but stayed mounted. Mason shifted position, making his way toward the barn as planned. Inside, he climbed to the hayloft, gaining a vantage point over the yard. Through his scope, he recognized Jack Blackwell instantly. Older, heavier, but with the same cruel set to his mouth. Three men rushed the house, firing wildly at windows. Sarah's responding shots were measured, each one finding its mark. Mason targeted the men, providing covering fire, dropping another before Blackwell realized the danger from the barn. "Burn it!" Blackwell's voice carried across the yard. "Smoke 'em out!" Flames licked up the side of the barn with alarming speed. Mason grabbed his rifle and ammunition belt, descending rapidly as smoke filled the loft. He burst through the side door into a hail of gunfire, diving behind a water trough. A bullet grazed his arm, another splintered wood inches from his head. Mason returned fire, downing one more of Blackwell's men. Through the smoke and chaos, he spotted Sarah making her way toward him, using the distraction to change position. Their eyes met across 30 yards of open ground. A silent communication passed between them, the understanding of two fighters recognizing the same grim calculation in each other. Mason broke cover, firing rapidly to draw attention, while Sarah sprinted toward the relative safety of the burning barn's shadow. It worked too well. Bullets kicked up dust at Mason's feet as he ran, one catching him in the thigh. He stumbled, nearly falling before regaining his balance behind a stack of hay bales. Blood soaked his pant leg, but there was no time for first aid. Blackwell and his remaining two men were converging on the house, where the children were hidden. Sarah reached Mason's position, her face smudged with gunpowder and sweat. "You're hit!" "It'll keep," Mason grunted. "They're heading for the house." A child's scream cut through the gunfire. Michael's voice, high with terror. Sarah's face went white. "The boys, go," Mason said. "I'll handle Blackwell." She hesitated just a moment before squeezing his shoulder and disappearing toward the house. Mason checked his ammunition. 3 rounds left in the Winchester, 6 in his Colt. He tightened a bandana around his thigh, then began circling toward where Blackwell stood directing his men. The moment came quicker than expected. Rounding the burning barn, Mason found himself 20 paces from his old lieutenant. Blackwell turned, surprise registering on his face before twisting into a hate-filled grin. "Mason Reed," Blackwell drawled, "still playing hero after all these years." "It's over, Jack." Mason leveled his rifle. "Your men are down. Sheriff's deputies will be here any minute." Blackwell laughed. "Always were a poor liar, Reed." He gestured toward the house. "All I want is the boy, and what he knows. Give him to me. You all walk away." "Not happening." "Then you die here," Blackwell said simply, drawing his revolver with startling speed. Mason fired, but pain made his shot go wide. Blackwell's bullet struck the Winchester, knocking it from Mason's hands. Before he could draw his Colt, Blackwell closed the distance, tackling him to the ground. They grappled in the dirt, each fighting for advantage. Despite his wound, Mason managed to land several solid blows. But Blackwell had always been a dirty fighter. His thumb found Mason's bullet wound, digging in with vicious pressure. Pain exploded through Mason's leg. Blackwell used the moment to pin him, pressing a knife to his throat. "You should have let them hang me," Blackwell hissed, blade drawing blood. "I was wrong about that," Mason gasped. "Won't make the same mistake twice." Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "No second chances today, Reed." "Put the knife down," came a young voice from behind. Blackwell froze, then slowly turned his head. James stood 10 feet away. Sarah's Remington Derringer pointed steadily at Blackwell's back. "Boy's got spirit," Blackwell said, his knife still at Mason's throat. "Just like his father." "My father was a coward," James replied, voice stronger than his years. "Mr. Reed isn't." Blackwell's attention split for just an instant, enough for Mason to wrench his arm free and drive his own knife upward, finding the old wound from Chancellorsville that had never properly healed. Blackwell's eyes widened in shock as Mason twisted the blade, finishing what Confederate lead had started a decade earlier. "That's for our men at Antietam," Mason growled. "The ones you sold out." Blackwell slumped forward, his life bleeding out onto the Arizona dust. Mason struggled to his feet as Sarah rushed to James, taking the derringer and pulling her son into a fierce embrace. In the distance, hoofbeats announced the arrival of Sheriff Patterson and 3 deputies. Too late for the fight, just in time for the cleanup. 1 month later, Mason sat on his newly rebuilt porch, legs still stiff but healing well. Sarah emerged from the house, coffee pot in hand, refilling his cup without asking. "Daniel's got away with that new colt," she remarked, sitting beside him. "Never seen a horse take to someone so quick." "Boy has a gift," Mason agreed. "James, too. His shooting's improving daily." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The gold from Sarah's pouch had been returned to the Tucson bank, earning a substantial reward that had paid for the ranch repairs and then some. "Sheriff offered me a deputy's badge," Mason said finally. "Said the territory needs men who can handle themselves." Sarah glanced sideways at him. "Will you take it?" "Thinking on it. Would mean being gone some days." "We'd manage." She smoothed her apron. "The boys have gotten used to this place. To you." Mason nodded, noticing how she said "we" without hesitation. "About what I said before the fight. About us staying," she finished for him. "Yes." Sarah turned to face him fully. "Mason Reed, I'm not looking for promises or pretty words. I've had my fill of those." "Not offering them," he replied. "Just partnership. This land, these children, they need tending, and I find I've grown accustomed to your cooking." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Is that your way of proposing, Mr. Reed?" "I suppose it is, Mrs. Mitchell. Nothing fancy about it." "Good," she said firmly. "I've had enough fancy lies to last a lifetime. I'll take plain truth from a plain-spoken man." From inside came the sound of the boys arguing over dinner chores, bringing a warmth to the house that had been absent too long. Mason's hand found Sarah's, rough fingers entwining with hers. No passionate declarations, no flowery sentiments, just the simple acknowledgement that some storms are better weathered together than alone. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Mason Reed, rancher, sharpshooter, and now, unexpectedly, head of a cobbled-together family, felt something he hadn't experienced since before the war. The solid foundation of purpose, stretching before him like the endless Arizona horizon. Some men are shaped by blood and battle, others by the land they claim. The rarest find themselves defined by the people they choose to protect, and who, against all odds, choose them in return. If Mason Reed's story of honor and redemption stirred something in your soul, remember to subscribe to Frontier Tales for more adventures from America's untamed West. Every week, a new story of courage, justice, and the men who built this nation, one bullet, one decision, one stand at a time. This is Wild West storytelling for men who understand that true strength isn't measured by notches on a gun, but by the lives a man chooses to defend.